then we go back to, once it's live, we go back to this. All right, I think we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 38 of Exploring Genuine Transformation. My name is Lori Beth, and I'm here with Mary McGilray, and we are in live from Bali together. Yeah. And today on the show, we are going to be talking about a very important topic. Is the coaching industry giving you PTSD? And Mary and I, in our different lines of work in this industry, Mary is a business coach or a business consultant, and I will give her a proper introduction in a moment. And I am a psychotherapist and a psychospiritual mentor, doing a lot of early attachment and trauma work in this field. So we are going to be talking today about this topic. I will first introduce Mary, and then I'll introduce the topic a little bit more, and then we will dive in. So I'm happy for you to be here. I'm not used to being in person with someone.
Hi, guys.
Here we are. So Mary is the CEO of Satya Consulting, which is a firm that scales intentional early stage startups from pre-seed to growth. Satya's clients have made 1 million plus in revenue from her strategies in the last 18 months. And Mary comes from PepsiCo, University of Michigan Ross School of Business, and Harvard School of Business. And, she works with spiritual entrepreneurs as well, and really bringing in, practice and I would say proven business strategies and skills, while also really working with each person that she's working with sort of in what works for them. So, and I have personally experienced Mary's work, and it's extremely powerful, the way that she works, and we'll kind of get into this in the show. And she's also, what's exciting about this particular episode, is PTSD, is the coaching industry giving you PTSD, is that we'll be able to look at both of our work, but, especially in terms of Mary's work being a business consultant in this industry, and the importance of working with someone who actually, it isn't just modeling their business program off of something that they did that worked for them, but actually is modeling off of a lot of experience and training. And that relates to this topic today.
Mm-hmm. So Lori, I have a question. And
she already has a question.
I do have a question, right? I do have a question. I have a lot of questions. Guys, this is what you'll know. I have a lot of questions, but I also have a lot of answers. So the idea for this interview came up because we basically were having a chat one day over dinner, and we started talking about this, about how both of us in our personal experiences building businesses in this industry, or that are peripherally associated with this industry, ended up essentially feeling like shit and not really knowing why, and also not having successful businesses, right? And the really interesting thing here is, we were having this conversation, and organically what you mentioned actually is that a lot of the dynamics and how this industry is structured create this relationship that very much echoes in a way, like, how would you frame it up? Like symptoms or expressions of like PTSD.
Yeah, I mean, I would say symptoms and expressions of specifically early attachment trauma. I think that someone, and I can explain that more, and I think that someone could also enter this industry, and even with kind of not having a history of that, could also experience elements of trauma because of some of what is talked about in this industry. But specifically, if you have early attachment trauma, like developmental trauma, and you've grown up in a family where your parent was inconsistent or abusive or neglectful, often you were trying to get your needs met or trying to get the love that you needed, and ended up ultimately not being able to get what you needed and then blaming yourself. That's what children do. They internalize, well, it must be something wrong with me that I can't somehow be successful at this kind of bid for love or, you know, any kind of need.
So how does this parallel like a coaching dynamic? Coaching, by the way, guys, we mean coaching like specifically in 2020. You know, we're not talking about like executive coaching the way it was 20 years ago, right? It's like specifically the way the coaching industry is right now. Why does this dynamic exist, do you think? Like, how does this relationship actually come forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'm tempted. I'm wondering if we should be going into the history of the industry first.
Well, we can talk about that too, but I think it's interesting, right? Because
Sure.
this is like, so something not a lot of people realize. You know, when we were talking about it at dinner the other night, I was like, oh, it made a lot of sense. Okay, so give us the framework, please.
Okay. Well, I mean, from what I can see and what I've experienced in this industry is there's a lot of emphasis on like somebody, like a coach offering something and saying, if you just do A, B, and C, you can gain mastery over this. And if you just do it like me, like I did all these things, and here's my like process that worked for me, which maybe works for them, but maybe doesn't work for like 90% of the people that actually enter their programs, which I think is the case. And I have had that experience in business coaching programs that I've done where sure, it works for like 1 out of 6 of the people. What the coach said would happen actually did happen. So I think there's like an overpromising that of results and mastery. And it's something that I really noticed like coming from a therapy background where like there isn't a lot of emphasis in the therapy world of, you know, so much around, okay, you have anxiety, you have depression, you want a relationship or you want, you know, a more successful career. There's still not as much of an emphasis when someone enters therapy on like, okay, in 3 months or in 10 weeks, you know, you're going to have this relationship of your dreams because it's pretty unrealistic.
Yeah.
For, you know, we don't know all the factors basically. Like we have to, I mean.
Like what kind of factors?
Well, we don't know like somebody's history, what they've experienced. Like there's a thorough assessment that I think is necessary in understanding where someone's coming from. I mean, I could speak to like my experience in a very high-end business coaching program that I did early on when I first entered the coaching industry. And basically it was like, in retrospect, I was so new to the industry and had absolutely no following that the kinds of methods that she would be, you know, asking me to do would inevitably not lead in 6 months to, it was actually more like, it was sort of promised almost in 4 months that, you know, to me having this successful group program, it just wasn't possible. So I was working really, really hard, employing everything that she was telling us to do and trying different things. And sure, there were small successes, right? Like I built more of an audience or people got to know me, but it was an unrealistic promise. And then there was also in that, you know, some emphasis because I had actually been quite successful financially in my therapy business that I would be able to replicate that also. And that, oh, you must have, you know, this will be a good example. Like you must really, you know, you have a good relationship with money and you really, you know, there's a lot of emphasis in the coaching industry with money. Like if you are able to ask for what you want and get it, that means that you're like, you know, you don't have limiting beliefs and, you know, you believe in your worth, right? But I actually didn't have limiting beliefs and I actually do believe in my worth and I wasn't able to charge what I actually wanted to be charging, in part because I didn't have the right audience. Like my positioning wasn't correct and I didn't actually have.
Well, and here's the thing, right? Like coming off of your experience, so much of what we see in this industry is, and which is why often it, you know, quite frankly, gives people sense, like fucks people up. I mean, for better use of the word, right? Is because
to be kind.
Yeah, to be kind. I mean, but really, right? It's like the thing that happens that we see is we get, for example, either people who are new in business or new in coaching, or we get seasoned professionals like yourself who come in and like they're very passionate, they're very excited. If they're a seasoned professional, likely they've had a successful business, and then they come in, they buy a system They literally buy a system from a coach, you know, and I've had this experience too. And this is basically, and we can talk all about how this actually happens in the industry, but they buy a system and then the system doesn't work for them because it's a system. It's actually not, it's like building a house off of no foundation. It's like just building a bunch of walls and a roof with no foundation on it. Like that's actually not how business works. And really that's not how any industry works. That's not how life works.
No.
You know, it's like in what other, it's like going to the gym and only doing bicep curls and then being like, why are my glutes not muscular and sexy? It's like, duh.
It's interesting that you say that because I just had the parallel that I think that's the therapy industry has its own, you know, issues that we're not going to get into here. But I think that what you just said about foundation is one thing that the therapy industry does well, because there's more actually of an emphasis on building the psychological foundation, building the foundation of, you know, like, oh, I want to be in a relationship. How do I communicate better? You know, where are my boundaries? Or, oh, I want, you know, to be successful at my career. What's getting in the way of that? Let's look at that in like, and do the deep, you know, work and do the trauma work to unwind why that might be there for me and then build new skill sets. And so, yeah, I think that's interesting. Like the word foundation. I do want to just go back to the question that you asked, because I'm not sure I answered it because we've gone in, I mean, we've gone in good directions, but around the early attachment wounding, which I think, you know, I think if we go back to that with what we've been kind of sharing, that I think that this coaching model of mastery and of like, or of, you know, if you just do A, B, and C like I did, you're going to have this lifestyle. And, you know, people are selling that kind of lifestyle, which honestly, at this point, I kind of cringe because I don't trust it. Like at this point, I actually don't really trust it in my own body. But I think that kind of creates the same sort of hungry ghost syndrome that's what I call it, that I think is created in early attachment wounding, which is like, if I just try harder, if I just do the right thing, and leads to a lot of shame and self-blame. Like, I can never get there. What's wrong with me? Why can't I be that? And it's also something that is like outside of us, right? Like it's like, I'm searching for this thing. I'm searching for the love that I never got. I'm searching for, you know, I mean, in my opinion, even saying like, this is just not my value system. And I've been realizing it more and more, but even being like, oh, if I do this thing, I'm going to be successful in this way, and that's going to make me happy. Like, I think that's also what it promises. And I think that's also false, because wouldn't it be great if we could actually, in our work, whether it's business coaching, whether it's in the sort of emotional, you know, I mean, I would say my work is actually going to the foundations that people can actually have an experience of having what they want in life, which I think is then business. It is having a successful business. It is having a successful relationship. It's having a successful life. But I think it's also about feeling good about yourself in the process and enjoying the process, and it not being something that's like this unrealistic thing out there that I think once I finally get, I'm going to be happy, and that's going to bring me, you know, contentment. And so like, even, you know, I can even share in terms of my like, you know, business process is, as I've gone through the industry and really actually had to I would say one of the things it probably does for all of us is I have had early attachment trauma. So it definitely triggered that.
Like a lot of people.
You know,
right.
And I don't think, exactly. I think, and so it's, you know, it's to different degrees.
Yeah.
So I think everybody's experienced some kind of trauma that then is probably going to get reactivated in this industry. I'm sure everybody could tell a story, like any coach or any person that's sort of actively online.
Even if the trauma is just, I spent $15,000 and it literally did nothing for me. And then I was $15,000 in the hole and then I was fucked. I hear that a lot. I get a lot of clients, you know, who come to me because they're like, you know, I've worked with like 8 coaches. Nothing has worked. I tried this system. I tried that niche. Every coach tells me the same 5 things, you know, and then none of it works. Why doesn't it work? And I'm like, well, you know, what was it like? Who did you work with? What was their background? And like, generally it's just people who look good on Instagram or on Facebook or whatever, and says that they're making, you know, $100,000 a month or something like that. And so people like, I mean, part of the challenge of this industry is like, for some reason, people in this industry are very gullible around marketing.
Yeah.
You know, they like buy into when this individual on Instagram says they're making $100,000 a month. Part of that I would say is people just don't understand what a business looks like when it makes $100,000 a month. And part of it is just people are like in the Wild West, like chasing gold mentality of like, oh, I want that, you know? But yeah, so then they buy into it. They spend a lot of money. It doesn't work because the coach or the program or whatever isn't actually qualified to help them do what they want to do. And then all of a sudden, as you were saying, it's like they've been seeking outside of themselves for so long for all of these answers. But like really what they lack is that foundational inner knowledge about what is right for either them personally or in their business.
So then that relates, when you were talking, I was thinking another kind of correlation to sort of to sort of how we develop, and also how we develop self-esteem and confidence actually as children. And then how that kind of repeats itself, right? Is that,
and can you wait before you do this? Can you tell us though actually about like your background here? Because I think some of my viewers don't know you yet. But Lori, I mean, you have an amazing background with parents and children.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've been a psychotherapist for the last 13 years, and one of my main specialties has been working with children and teenagers and their parents. So I've worked with kids, you know, as young as 3 all the way, you know, like hundreds of them. And so I've also worked with adults for, you know, that whole time as well. And so I really understand kind of I understand from actually working, I mean, with all ages, but I can see in adults the different developmental ages that they're occupying, you know, because we all have parts of self that we're, you know, there's different developmental stages as we go through life where we get thwarted and where we need support and help. So yeah, I think that's the background you were asking about. Yeah. And, you know, so to me, I mean, my specialty, I would say, is more developmental trauma, although I do work with all kinds of traumas because I've developed, you know, through my work, I've kind of taken the leading trauma modalities and my own clinical experience and created my own way of working with trauma that really works directly with the body and with the nervous system. So I think one correlation that I was thinking about when you were just saying what you were talking about is that kind of like what actually builds confidence and self-esteem and also allows us to feel our own sense of worthiness, I would say, is that we are taking realistic steps. So it's taking small realistic steps and being like, oh, I was successful at that. Like that's how kids actually develop self-esteem. It's not actually kids who are in environments where there's something, they're either like their parent is like, you're so amazing, like all the time. And it's not actually realistic to, I mean, even actually, I recently have a client who it was realistic for, he's now like 21. And it was realistic for, he actually did really well. And now he's struggling because he doesn't have resiliency. He doesn't actually know, well, oh God, now I'm in college and I'm actually not successful at this. And because I feel ashamed about that, because I never learned the skills to develop resiliency, now he was basically hiding and pretending that it wasn't happening and then is failing out of school and really miserable. So it's the failing out of school is less important to me than being really miserable because, you know, that's actually what the importance is in that case. So I just think that's just an example. So when you were talking about it, I think that giving people, like in this industry, if we could give people realistic, like if coaches were not only talking about mastery, if they were, and some aren't, I think the industry's changing. I think there's a lot more people who are focusing on trauma. Those are the people that I definitely refer to. I think if you're not focusing on trauma and you're not trauma trained, then you need to be understanding what the symptoms of trauma are so that you're not, you need to be able to assess trauma accurately so that you're not overpromising something.
Yeah.
But I also think that just generally, if you are promising something, I mean, sure, let's work with the client's goals, but let's be realistic with where they're at. Like we need to do a realistic assessment, which I know you also do in your business. Like you're like, okay, this is where somebody's at in the industry. Like this is the skill sets that they have. I'm guessing like for business, maybe you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I know Lori talked about my bio, but the really interesting thing for me about business consulting, business, I would say maybe coaching, you could say, I see consulting and coaching as two separate things. Like the reason I call myself a consultant is because I operate in the way of a traditional business consultant, you know, the way they have for the last 150, 200 years, right? Where you go in, you diagnose what's actually happening in the business based on foundational business principles. And based on the skill set of the consultancy, you make targeted specific recommendations to help that business get to where the owner or the, you know, the company needs to get to, right? And what we see actually in the coaching industry, the coaching model is, here's a system that gets a specific result. Let's just apply it to almost any type of business, you know. And interestingly enough, often you see business coaching pitched emotionally, which I don't think is a bad thing, right? Because when we have, for example, solo entrepreneurs, like their emotional wellness is really part of the business. But like, honestly, guys, it's like, if you have a business coach who's saying, oh, you'll make $100,000 in a month and then you'll be happy and then you'll have a great family and then you'll be able to buy a boat and then you'll be able to buy a nice car. Like, don't you want to feel special? And you buy their system and it doesn't fucking work. It's like, yeah, I mean, you realize that you made an emotional purchase, you know? But yeah, I mean, does that make sense? I mean, part of the reason why we don't see a lot of assessments in the coaching industry is because, quite frankly, a lot of people are not actually qualified to do an assessment, or they actually, they think they might be, which isn't bad. It's like, yes, we want to have that in any sort of coaching relationship and understanding of where the person is at. But until you are a highly trained and skilled professional, like the reason you enter a coaching program and they don't actually look at where you're at is because most of them don't know their head from their tail in a business or in really somebody's emotional wellness, right? Like, I mean, you've had like thousands of hours of clinical work, and like most coaches who are doing trauma work, it's like maybe they did one training or they just, you know, went on a meditation retreat and now want to teach people how to heal from trauma. It just is what it is.
Yeah, or I often hear from people sometimes I hear from coaches like, that's true with trauma. There are definitely people who have, I know there are a number of coaches now who've gone through the somatic experiencing training and who are offering that.
Well,
and that's great, because that's a 3-year, you know, program. Yeah. And what was I going to say? I was thinking that, yeah. And I think that there's a number of coaches that, I mean, I think one of the things that I was drawn to in the industry, I'll say, is that the innovativeness, like for me, it's helped me as I've entered into this industry to really, I mean, I could have done this also just in my therapy work, but, and partly why I'm in this industry, I'll just say, is because I want to serve more people, because as a therapist, and my programs are more holistic and sort of more all encompassing, you know, they're more high touch. They're more, I don't know how to describe that. They're more intensive, I think, in my mentorship program than in my, you know, psychotherapy practice. But yeah, I mean, I love the innovativeness of the industry, which I think is why I entered it. And then also, but at the same time, I think that there are so many coaches teaching something that they just did themselves and they were successful at. And
a lot of them weren't even successful at it, though. That's
really? You don't think
yeah.
So?
Fuck yeah. I mean, if we think about the history of the industry, like half of that, that's what that is. Right? Say more. Like, yeah, why don't we get into the history a little bit, since you just said that? Yeah. Yeah, because you know. So here's the really interesting thing about the coaching industry, guys. And when I say coaching, I mean both business coaching and then, you know, personal development type of coaching. The coaching industry as it is in 2020, coaching 15 years ago was not like this. Coaching 15 years ago was what we think of as like stodgy old executive coaches, maybe life coaches back then. It was not this like sort of glitzy, glamorous, celebrity driven, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, those people did exist, but it wasn't at the top of the popular consciousness the way it is now. What happened was we had a couple of really big figures emerge onto the scene really strongly, maybe really starting like 10 years ago. On the personal development side, we have Tony Robbins, and you know, he spawned a whole lot of imitators and people who are very similar to him. And we also have Gabby Bernstein. And so that's personal development, man, you know, the lead guy, the lead woman. And then we have a lot of other people who you could also add into that camp. And then in the business coaching side, we have a man named Sam Ovens who, and like what happened basically is in both personal development and business coaching, they spawned 1,000 imitators. Why? Because they're really great marketers. Sam Ovens, if you don't know him, go to consulting.com, which he purchased, basically built a business that was basically a training program. He built an agency, ostensibly like an online agency working with other businesses, and he used this certain type of funnel in this business, a certain type of client management system. So he built this system, and then he started selling that system to other people. He bought this URL, consulting.com, and then he started to train other people to use his system to grow their businesses. So it was basically a training program, right? But then all of these people took his system and started selling it to other people. There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's like, yes, it's good to sell a tactic if it works, obviously. But the thing is, the system that he uses, was very effective in like 2014, 2015. And now in 2020, it no longer works. Right? So if we think about like, I'm sure if you've gone through a business coaching program, you have these like foundational things where it's like, find a niche, have your avatar, do your, you know, and then you do some organic, and then you build a webinar funnel, right? And it's either live pitching or you're, you know, pre-recording it and you're doing sort of like shitty Facebook ads on it. That's the basics of Sam Ovens' system. 2020, that doesn't work, right? And also, buying a system does not equal having a business.
Why doesn't it work in 2020?
A lot of reasons it doesn't work in 2020. Number one, the market is completely saturated. Like everybody and their mother out there thinks that has bought a system and now thinks they're a coach, right? Which, I mean, actually, like, I think it's great that people want to help people. You know, I don't see that as a bad thing. Like, I don't see it that it's bad that coaching is becoming popular, because it shows that people are excited to help others and that we want to connect, you know? But it doesn't work in 2020 because everybody's using the same tactics. They're using tactics, right? They're not actually building a foundation underneath something, because quite frankly, business is actually really hard. Hard in that being an entrepreneur is hard. You know, we talk about that, but it's not really that relevant.
And it takes time.
It takes time.
I actually think that's the parallel. I mean, that's another piece to both of our work. Like, I think that's one of the ways that the coaching industry is extremely unrealistic. And then obviously what I said before, it sort of feeds that sense of like shame and what's wrong with me, that I can't, it's another way that it's like, I can't accomplish this, when actually creating a business takes a lot of time. I had an extremely successful therapy business. I never went into it thinking I need this to happen immediately. And it happened like over time, and it was extremely successful over time. You know, not immediately. And I think that's also true for like deep emotional work. Like, sure, you could do, you know, you can do like, I mean, I've had a lot of, you can do some, you can get an activation from someone or do some, there's a lot of quantum healing out there, or even just like, you know, doing something that helps with mastery. But to actually rewire the nervous system, that takes time. Like, to actually move through deep traumas, it doesn't, you know, it takes, we don't get to decide how long it takes. We have to keep doing the work.
And it never takes the same amount of time for any person.
Exactly, for each person.
Right.
Yeah, and same with business. Like, it's not, and the same with, you know, the parallel with business too, is that it doesn't, you know, yes, like you need the foundation, like you're saying, but it's also so specific and personalized to each person, which I also think is true in the work that I do. So it's like, what works for, you know, what's going to work for me as a business owner is completely different than what may work for you, you know, and sort of how I need to create that foundation, the kind of like, what kind of self-care do I need? Like, what excites me, you know, what is like organic and authentic to me? And then, you know, what is it that I think for business, right? Like, what is it that can each person sort of, what are their gifts and strengths and background that they can leverage, you know, in the field?
If they're a solo entrepreneur, totally.
Yeah. But that's interesting about the coaching. So basically it's like, I mean, are you saying that in the past, those models did work when people replicated
well, here's
them?
the thing, right? When we think about market saturation in the industry, a successful system can work until there are so many people using it that the market becomes bored of it. Right? I mean, it's like, think about like when, for example, I'm trying to think of a very popular product. When everybody started getting an iPhone, like years and years ago, then it was like a really hot thing. Everybody wanted an iPhone. You know, it was like, oh my God, if you had an iPhone, you were so cool. And then the next iPhone came out, the next iPhone came out. Before too long, pretty much everybody had an iPhone. Or if they didn't have an iPhone, it's because they consciously chose not to, right? Or, you know, they had a real reason. A real reason being like, they were like, I just can't afford this, so I'm not even gonna stress about it, you know? But like, there was market saturation on iPhones. And right now it's like Apple has to enter new markets other than, you know, North America and some of these big Asian markets, because they're just out of people. Like they can't actually, there's no more people to buy new iPhones. They're like stealing from Samsung, et cetera. But it's the same thing with coaching, right? It's like this system worked when people were excited about watching a fucking webinar for 2 hours. And like when people actually thought it was a good idea to spend $3,000 for somebody that they met for 2 hours on a webinar. And then, you know, lo and behold, 5 years later, people are like, well, everybody's doing a webinar. Half of these webinars are really boring, you know, like, or probably 98% of them. And quite frankly, I'm not going to spend money with somebody I just met on a webinar. And that's just an example of it, you know, but we see it the same thing with like the organic posting in Facebook groups. We see the same thing with some of these other things. But here's the other thing too, is it doesn't mean none of these techniques never work, because they do, and that's why they're still taught. It just means that we have to be really mindful and aware of what we are looking at the technique to do in the business. Because if we are looking at a webinar to cold traffic to drive sales, it's not going to do that. But if we're looking at a webinar as a way to have people enter our funnel, and then we communicate with them and bring them into the sphere in a bunch of different ways, then it actually can work. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It makes perfect sense. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just really important that we're talking about this specifically because obviously the the foundation of anybody who's in the coaching industry is you have to have a business. So you have to, you know, sort of, and also I think what's so important about you speaking about this is that, I mean, the hope, obviously a big hope in this conversation is to support people, to, you know, understand where some of their shame and some of their kind of crazy making feelings can come from.
Yeah.
Because I think that is sort of what happens, right? Is that people inevitably feel like, why isn't this working for me? It worked for this coach. Why is this coach, why did this coach in a year be able to do this? And I can't seem to do that. What's wrong with me? You know, and
I can speak to my own experience in that if you'd like.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I've invested a lot of money in business coaching, probably like over $50,000. And it was really interesting because when I originally invested in business coaching, I went to one of the biggest, most prestigious programs out there. And I entered in at their program level, right, which was 10 weeks long. And I paid them a lot of money. And I entered into it and I wanted to learn a system for digital marketing. That was my goal. I was like, I'm a trained marketer. I have years and years of experience in traditional marketing. I've run like really big media campaigns, huge ad budgets, you know, like 25 million, 30 million. And so I know business, right? Not just marketing. I've also run a $250 million business on all levels. So it's like, I know business. I understand how marketing works. I understand how ad agencies work. But the thing I didn't have was actually digital marketing tool sets. And so I was like, well, I want to learn the at the time, 2018, 2019 digital marketing tool set. So I went into this business coaching program, and it's really interesting because I somehow ended up in this emotional headspace of thinking I knew nothing about fucking business.
Wow.
I mean, I went to fucking Harvard Business School and I ended up in this weird headspace of of like, I need to ask my coaches for help with everything. It was really weird. And I mean, I reflect on it now. I look back and I'm like, okay, I was probably, honestly, is what we talk about, almost in a state of quasi-trauma. And what happened actually in the program because I was in that program. I was basically convinced to sign up with him again for an even bigger thing because I was told I would not be successful if I didn't do that. And I paid a lot of money to be told that all I needed to do was what the coaches told me to do. I did what the coaches told me to do, and it didn't work because it was wrong. But I was told it was my mindset, and I was told that I didn't like money if I didn't do what they told me to do, you know, to the extreme. And so basically it was an untenable situation. It was like I actually couldn't work harder or hustle to get results because what I was told was wrong. For my business. It's not wrong for everybody's business. So then also there was this dynamic in the program of certain people were really successful. Like people with Fit Pro businesses were really successful. People with certain types of Facebook ad agencies were really successful because the system worked for their business, right? But it didn't work for my business. And I mean, because my business is a different market, different audience, different targeting. But I was like, I was somehow in this headspace of not trusting myself.
It's interesting because you and I have had such similar experiences because we are two, and this is what I think is also, they're actually two really good examples because we actually have the skills and the experience and the confidence. So that was why it was really crazy making for me. I'm like, why am I not being successful at this?
Exactly.
And why is this not working for me? And why am I actually feeling worse about myself when actually I feel completely confident and competent in the work that I do. Like I know that I can, you know, that I can deliver what I say I'm going to deliver, or that I can support people in the way that I'm actually, you know, here to support them. So it's kind of, it's like, I think the reason I think these are really good examples, specifically like Mary and I, and we obviously have very like parallel experiences because we both have had a lot of training and a lot of experience like in the fields that we're in. I think that is like, I mean, just imagining what it's like for people who, one, have early attachment, maybe have never been successful at business, or
are new, right?
Or are new. But I mean, that's the thing. Like I was new to this industry, but I wasn't new to like the kind of work that I offer.
And then they get into these programs
and we were feeling, and I mean, I do, you know, and we probably both have trauma, but I had actually already worked with I probably worked with hundreds of practitioners to rewire my trauma. So it wasn't like a huge active trauma in my world. I never had it around business. Like it was never anything.
And then all of a sudden you're like, why do I feel terrible?
Why do I feel terrible and what's wrong with me? So I think that's the importance of even our stories, is that like the psychology of it, whether you even have like, whether it's like a re-triggered trauma from your past, or whether it's something that, is just the coaching industry is just triggering that period, you know, and making people feel crazy because it is like an early childhood, like sort of abusive.
It is. Well, it's totally abusive. It's like what I was told to do is only ask the coaches for help, listen to the coaches. If you don't do what the coaches tell you, you're going to fail, basically, in some sense of the word. And I did what the coaches told me to do, and it didn't fucking work because the coaches didn't know how to work with my business. That was it. But then I was in this weird emotional tailspin the whole time, being like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. It's not working. It's not working. I better try harder. I better try harder. And when you were talking, I was also thinking, I entered this industry, I think, you know, in order to be able to serve more people and serve more people around the world, and also to really specialize. I just really have always had a passion for working with girls and women. So, and breaking free from conditioning, and, you know, really stepping into their own sovereignty, which for me means like being exactly who they are. So helping people follow that. And so my work is extremely non-dogmatic. It always has been. And I'm always just working with what works for this person. You know, what do they want, and how are we going to get there in a way that's going to work for them. And one of the reasons you can do that too, which I think is really interesting about your background, is like, not only are you a trained psychotherapist, but you train in multiple modalities of therapy. like dozens literally, but also you have a really rich personal journey, and you have a really rich spiritual background with years and years of practice in a variety of modalities. You know, it's truly like she can offer this experience because of that. Whereas what we see in the industry too is a lot of people are not at that point in their journey, so they actually are not qualified to offer customized experience, which is fine, so don't. Right, but instead what they offer is the solution, but they actually don't have the solution.
That's really interesting.
It's like a fundamental,
that's really, really interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way, and I think part of they're offering the solution, and you know, I think one of the important things then is like, this isn't to say that people shouldn't offer what they're offering, but they need to be then realistic about what they're offering and what they can actually give people, and not promise something that they can't. So if you have a system that's like, this is what worked for me, not like, this is what works for everybody's business. Like that's in your example. Or, you know, if you're gonna offer some kind of course and you're saying, hey, we're gonna work on boundaries, or we're gonna work on communication, like be very specific about what you're gonna offer and what people are gonna get out of it, so that, you know, they can, or what I said earlier, the importance of actually, I mean, the main importance I think for coaches is, and I never have done a coaching, like sort of a coaching program, so I don't know what they teach there, but is like, how do we assess whether this person is a good person for my program, right? Like,
well, the problem, I mean, the fundamental problem too, though, is a lot of coaches have paid a lot of money to a lot of coaching programs that didn't work. So a lot of coaches actually really need clients. So then they kind of take in whoever's there. This is not true for everyone, mind you, definitely not, but it's true for more than you would see. And so then all of a sudden, like, they're like, oh my God, I took in these clients. I actually don't know what to do. You know,
it's a really good point.
Or I have a client who's a bad fit, who should be somewhere else, but I really need the money, which is a real problem, I think, for a lot of people. It's just realistic. It's a problem. Yeah.
Well, it's also like it's like a cat chasing
its own tail.
Own tail. That's what it feels like to me, because, and this is actually the fundamental disease in the industry, in my opinion, what you just spoke to, because because there's these high-end programs that people, and you know, we haven't even gotten into how sales happens, and kind of, in my opinion, like at times, like the sort of like pushing somebody into a program, or, you know, the techniques to kind of like, oh, I can sell this high-end program, when actually maybe that person's not a fit. Maybe that actually is way too much money for that person, like legitimately, like it's actually going to throw them off, and it's not good for them. You know, and then people become in so much debt that, like you said, there's a sense of like, oh shit, now I feel a sense of scarcity. I'm blaming myself. I'm not talking about it. I mean, who talks about this? This is the other thing. Very few coaches actually talk about their experience of this online. So that's partly what we're also doing here, is revealing that. Because like, and I have actually talked about it some. But I also, even when I talked about it in the past, I would notice, like, I remember I was talking about it like in January, after I had been through this several times. And I remember feeling like, oh, but I can't say it. Like, even me being like very direct about it, I still felt like, oh, but I will look bad, even though I actually trust my work. I know my work.
Yeah.
I know that I actually can offer what I offer.
So two things. Thing one is, the reason why you feel like you'll look bad is because so many coaches are playing out of the same pool, which is Facebook. Now also Instagram, but really Facebook. And quite frankly, the average human being on Facebook cannot tell the fucking difference between a coach who says they're making $100,000 a month and, you know, driving a Porsche, versus somebody who's extremely qualified and skilled with years of history, who said, look, I've been doing this for fucking 15 years and it was hard for me to launch my business. Here's why. The average person, and I hear this all the time actually from people on calls, on, you know, clients of mine who come to me and when they're finally like, I actually need to build a real business. But like, they say things like, yeah, I signed up for this person because they said they were a self-made millionaire before 24 on their social media profile. And I'm like, look at how they're living. Like, use your discernment. People lack discernment. They just sort of buy celebrity, right? So for example, this one coach who says she's a self-made millionaire before 24, it's like, what does that actually mean? Look at their house. If they're showing their lifestyle, look at their lifestyle. Like, how are they living? What are they doing? What does their business look like? Right? Like, what does the fucking business look like? Because if the business is really making millions and millions of dollars, it will look like that. You will see that. They will act in a different way. They will act like a CEO instead of just as like a kid recording podcasts out of their bedroom.
Well, I'm curious about that though, because I have seen people online that like I think there are some people who actually
are, but there's a difference between calling oneself a millionaire and having a business that made $1 million over the entire life of the business. Not the same thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Most people.
So you're
don't
sort
know
of
that.
speaking to, because you've seen this so many times that.
Oh, yeah, everybody, they all say on the profile, like, I'm a self-made millionaire, but then they have like 5 roommates and they're living in like a, a small apartment and in whatever, in like Iowa or something, and you're like, okay, you're not a self-made millionaire. And then that's not a bad thing. There's no fucking shame. Just say who you are.
Yeah.
Right. So then, what we also see right now too, though, is some of these big figures in the industry, they're feeling this downward pressure on prices. They're feeling this pressure from people enrolling in them because the market is fucking saturated. So for example, I'm getting served up with ads from people like Preston Smiles, who started Men's Work, for pay as you can coaching for an incredible amount of value from somebody who is ostensibly one of the highest figures in personal development in Men's Work. And it's like, I don't think it's a bad thing that people are doing and trialing new things. Like, that's the whole point of business. But my thing always, but then I have, clients who come to me and they're like, I just want to be like Preston. And I'm like, do you really? Is that a sustainable business model? Is that a well-managed business? It's like, yes, maybe you enjoy his energy and the way he communicates and all of these things, and maybe how he works with people. That's great to, learn from, but use your discernment. People don't. And then they buy a promise, they go off to the Wild West looking for gold, and then all of a sudden they wake up and they're like, oh, this didn't work.
Well, it also doesn't support something psychologically that I think is one of the most important things, and actually what I think is one of the truest barometers of happiness and well-being, which is that kind of inner self-trust and following one's own path.
Yeah.
Because again, it's sort of looking out to, and that's what I think kind of infuriates me about the coaching industry and about this model. It sort of, it sort of, not only does it trigger, or act upon people's old traumas.
Yep.
I also think that it's something that doesn't actually lead to true happiness, because you're kind of chasing a hungry ghost that's out there. You think that, oh, this person has this lifestyle, and because they have it this way, if I just had that, then I would be happy, then I'll feel good. Yep. But I believe that we feel happy because, like I said before, we feel happy, or we feel good in our own skin, or we feel our own sense of well-being because we are in truth with ourselves, because we're following our own path, because we're expressing ourselves exactly as we are here to express ourselves, like in what feels right for us. Like, I truly believe that. I mean, that's how I feel.
Well,
and then also the small, what I said before about like, that like it's way more sustainable both internally in a mental health way, but also externally, to be taking small steps and to say, oh, yay, I feel good about myself because I learned this new skill, which the coaching industry is great at. I mean, I think the coaching industry is great in the sense of, let's learn some new skills. You don't have to like do endless process work to get there. Yeah. And that's where like my work is a combination of that. It's like, let's learn these skills, but let's learn them realistically. Let's also do the deep work, because sometimes, and this is what I think we haven't spoken to. I mean, we've spoken to a little bit today, but I've spoken to it a lot in the past, is like, you can keep trying to create a business, but you actually have so much trauma that you actually need to do trauma work around. Like, there's things in the way, like your nervous system is too dysregulated for, so every single time you put out a post, oh my God, I didn't get enough likes. I feel completely annihilated by this, or somebody said this thing to me online and it hurt my feelings. Or, I work with clients who like, they are completely creative and brilliant. They they have such a beautiful offering, but they keep getting stuck because they keep getting triggered in their relationship, or, they basically have like old trauma, or they have, their nervous system isn't regulated. So they don't know how to. Yeah.
Here's the interesting thing too, that a lot of people don't realize. How does this system perpetuate itself? we think about it, and I'm going to put a little bit of a business frame on it.
Yeah.
In business, we have what are called consumer insights. So basically, like, we look at what people do with products, with life. We look at their attitudes. You know, we just understand how people behave. It's very psychologically based, but very data driven. And when you were speaking about this, it's the interesting thing for me is the reason the coaching system and the coaching business, the coaching world has become so self-perpetuating is because of the change in consumer behavior from watching TV, right, to being on a cell phone on social media. And so people who realistically probably would not ever have their own coaching business, you know, who maybe would be having some sort of like traditional job, working in an office, working retail, like whatever the job happens to be, now see online that it's possible to have their own business, which is fucking great. I love it. Let's do it. At the same time, they also end up in, as you said, if they haven't done a deep amount of personal work or they haven't actually learned the foundations of business, then this cycle starts of looking outside yourself for answers and then being on social media and seeing people who are ostensibly successful and being like, well, I just want to be like them. And instead of looking at TV and being like, well, I just want to be like this hot celebrity, now they're looking at somebody who feels more approachable.
That's a great analogy,
right?
Actually,
it's true, right?
Yeah.
It's like the person feels more approachable, and it's more like, oh, I could be that. And it's like, yeah, maybe you can, but you don't see everything that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, which is so important. Yeah. I'm just, I don't know. We may have covered the topic.
Are we out of time?
No,
I could talk about this for hours.
we could.
I could rip it to shreds.
Well, is there anything that you want to add? I want to do under an hour.
Yeah.
We're at like 50.
Anything I want to add? Nothing. I mean, for me, if you're curious to actually meet me and actually build a real business based on business, not based on a random system that worked for one dude 5 years ago, just being honest. But I mean, the way to reach me is on chatwithsatya.com. That's a direct link to my calendar. We can just chat if you're a good fit. And that's CHAT with SATYAA, Satya, the name of my business.com.
I'll put it in the
cool.
Yeah. And I have experienced Mary's work and you know, also know of her work in a multifaceted way, and I would really highly recommend it. I think that what we've been talking about today, I think that you really provide like almost the counter for that. It's like a reparenting, you know, of these negative business experiences.
I'll send it to you for reparenting. I'll teach you how to do business.
Well, I say, yeah, actually that's true. You'll teach people how to do, but I think that there's a sort of you're not teaching the kind of psychological underpinnings of it, but I think that there's so sorry.
I stick to my wheelhouse of business.
Yeah, which I think you're also good at. But what I meant in that is that I think that there can be a real healing for people.
Yeah.
But not in terms of like doing the deeper trauma work. But I think you
but
also
in terms of being equipped
to business. And I think that you also would know, you are a person who would know, oh, this person isn't equipped for my business, right? And that was something that I wanted to actually just add. It reminds me is that I think I think it's great to have these like high-end programs. And I think one of the downfalls of them is that if you're not assessing people accurately and then you're asking them to pay and then they can't get out of the program, they've paid a large sum of money, which is also extremely traumatizing for people because it's like, oh, but I wasn't a good fit for this. And what's wrong with me? And now I just gave all this money, which is, it's very jarring for people. And obviously people have like a very challenge. I mean, money is a challenge. People have a challenging relationship with money and they, you know, it's not an easy, it brings up all kinds of security and safety and what's wrong with me. I mean, I hear it all the time. So So I'm glad that you spoke to that. I mean, one thought I had, and I this speaks a little bit to my work, and I can say how you can also find me. But one of the things I was thinking when we were talking is that, you know, I entered this industry, I think, to be, like I said, to be able to serve people and be more innovative and kind of like, you know, sort of create more in my work. And that has happened. And the other thing I found is that when I didn't realize it, is that I think I came into this industry in order to help people who've been burned by this industry and who've been burned by like the law of attraction and mindset work and like, oh, if I just think positively, I can,
mindset bypass.
Yeah, mindset bypassing, which actually has always been something that I did in my work, even early on as a therapist, is that I was always the one who was helping people who were bypassing or who were kind of thinking, oh, what's wrong with me? Why can't I somehow just get over this? But it's really, really apparent in this industry. So it's a passion that I really feel in my work, is that I really want to help people to heal from these, it's both like early mistrustful relationships, but then those relationships that get re-traumatized and specifically get re-traumatized by this industry. And so I'm really interested in like, how do I help women? I mean, I think it's also particularly an issue for women because women tend to be conditioned to source outside of themselves and to look for the answers outside, and to also, we can talk about like all kinds of topics in terms of money and, in terms of women in money, women in business, women in, kind of how they might compromise themselves for a relationship and all that kind of stuff. But so anyway, so that's a big passion that I have, is actually creating the change for people, or doing the work to create the change to heal that sense of mistrust and to be able to trust themselves so that moving forward, they can make good choices for themselves, in all areas of their lives. So my business is, I do psycho-spiritual mentorship, and you can, I will also put I can put my link in the comments, sorry. And also I am offering a 4-week intensive program on rewiring your relationship with money, and doing that through the nervous system and through the body, and also through whatever, a lot of my work is like deep through the body, and looking at the symbolism, but like in an experiential way. And I started to do this work in one of my last classes, and was actually asked to teach on this. So there is still space in that, and please reach out to me if you're interested in that course.
It's amazing.
Yeah. All right. So feel free to also just, we would love to hear anything you have to say in the comments. We will respond to them. This is a really important topic. We might actually come on here again and do a part 2, because it could be, there's so many different nuances.
We will.
And we will.
I've just been signed up.
Here we are in Bali. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. And I will see you. This show happens at this time every single week. So I will see you next week with a new person. Okay. Bye. Let's see.